I let my sister's billionaire fiancé laugh in my face. He used an archaic dialect to humiliate me, certain I was too uneducated to understand. I waited until all 70 guests were smirking at his side before I replied in his own tongue. The room went dead silent. He did not crumble because I was fluent, but because I was the only one in that room who knew his empire was built on a lie. My name is Kendall Graham, and for the last 4 hours, I had been performing the role of a sentient piece of furniture. It was a role my family had assigned to me years ago, and one I had perfected to a terrifying degree. I stood near the periphery of the ballroom, right where the hand-painted wallpaper met the mahogany wainscoting, holding a flute of sparkling water that had gone warm 30 minutes ago. The setting was Newport, Rhode Island, inside a mansion that did not just whisper money, it screamed historical dominance. This was the engagement party for my younger sister, Delaney, and her fiancé, Gideon Voss. To the casual observer, or perhaps to the society photographers snapping blinding flashes near the entrance, this looked like a celebration of love. To anyone paying actual attention, it looked exactly what it was: a merger, a corporate acquisition where my sister was the asset being absorbed. I adjusted the strap of my dress. It was a dusty mauve chiffon number chosen by my mother, selected specifically because it was modest, expensive, and utterly forgettable. It was the kind of dress designed to blend into the background of photos, ensuring that the eye always traveled to the bride-to-be. That was the point. I was the backdrop. I was the reliable, unremarkable older sister who had failed to launch. The one who existed solely to make Delaney shine brighter by comparison. The room was suffocatingly crowded with 70 people who controlled enough capital to buy a small country. The air smelled of white lilies, expensive scotch, and the metallic tang of ruthless ambition. Gideon Voss stood in the center of it all, holding court. He was undeniably handsome in that sharp, predatory way that old money often bred. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, and his smile was a weapon he kept sheathed until he needed to cut someone. I watched him place a hand on the small of Delaney's back. It looked possessive, guiding, but I saw the pressure in his fingertips. He was steering her away from a conversation she was enjoying and toward a group of elderly men standing near the terrace doors. These were not just any guests. These were the Europeans, the heavy hitters, men with surnames that appeared on bank buildings in Zurich and shipping containers in Hamburg. I knew who they were, even if no one had introduced me. I knew because I made it my business to know things that people assumed were above my pay grade. Gideon caught my eye across the room. The smile did not reach his eyes. It never did. His gaze slid over me with a mixture of boredom and mild disgust, the way one might look at a smudge on a pristine tablecloth. Then, he whispered something to the men, and they all turned to look at me. It was not a look of interest. It was the look of men observing a mild curiosity that their host had pointed out for amusement. Gideon began to walk toward me. The crowd parted for him instinctively, like the Red Sea splitting for a shark rather than a prophet. He did not come alone. The cluster of European investors followed him, swirling their brandies, their faces etched with the arrogant anticipation of a private joke. My stomach tightened, but I did not move. I kept my posture straight, my chin level. I had practiced this stillness. "Kendall," Gideon said as he arrived in front of me. His voice was smooth, a rich baritone that charmed boardrooms and broke wills. "I was just telling our guests about you." "Were you?" I asked. My voice was steady, offering him nothing to grab onto. "Yes, I was explaining how good you are at supporting roles," he said, the insult wrapped in a layer of plausible deniability. He turned to the man on his right, a silver-haired titan of industry named Monsieur Allery. "Kendall here is very devoted to the family. She has a simple life, but she tries." The men chuckled. It was a low, rumbling sound, devoid of mirth. They were laughing because Gideon was the most powerful man in the room, and when the king laughs, the court follows suit. "Actually," Gideon continued, his eyes locking onto mine with a cruel glint, "we are a bit parched. Kendall, since you are standing so close to the service bar, perhaps you could be useful. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the humiliation of being treated like a waitress sink in. But that was not enough for him. He wanted to show off. He wanted to prove to these European elites that he was one of them, a man of culture and history, and that I was nothing more than an uneducated American pedestrian. He switched languages, but he did not switch to modern French, nor German, nor anything you might hear on the streets of Paris or Berlin today. Gideon Voss began to speak in law French. It was an archaic, dead dialect, a bastardized mixture of Norman French and English used in the judicial courts of England for centuries following the Norman conquest. It was the language of old statutes, of ancient property rights, of a time when the law was a cudgel used by the powerful to beat the weak into submission. It was a language of exclusion, designed specifically so that the common people could not understand the laws that governed them. "Kendall," he said, slipping into the antiquated tongue with a smirk. "Qu'est-ce que use le vin? Il convient avoir l'eau." Roughly translated, he was commanding me to fetch water for those drinking wine. The European men raised their eyebrows in genuine surprise. They recognized the dialect. To them, this was a secret handshake, a sign that Gideon Voss was not just a billionaire, but a scholar of their shared history. They looked at me, expecting a blank stare. They expected the confused panic of a woman who hears gibberish and knows she is the punchline. I gave them exactly what they wanted. I blinked, widening my eyes slightly, feigning the ignorance they were so desperate to see. Gideon's grin widened. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his cologne smelling of cedar and superiority. He decided to go for the throat. He wanted to make sure the insult was total. He spoke again, louder this time, ensuring the entire circle could hear him over the ambient jazz. "Femme seule. No," he corrected himself with a sneer, shaking his head as if pitying me. "Une parasite sans terre. Une chose en action. Rien plus." The room seemed to tilt. The insults were technical, vicious, and precise. He had called me a single woman a femme seule, but then corrected it to call me a landless parasite. A chose en action was a legal term for a personal right to property, something abstract, something that existed only on paper, not in reality. He was calling me a theoretical person, a nothing, a failed accessory to the family estate. The group of men burst into laughter. It was loud enough that heads turned from nearby tables. They clinked their glasses, toasting Gideon's wit. They believed, with absolute certainty, that the language barrier protected them. They thought I was standing there, smiling politely, completely unaware that I was being stripped naked and flayed alive with words from the 15th century. I stood there for 5 long seconds. I let the laughter roll over me. I let Gideon feel the triumph swell in his chest. I let him think he had won, that he had successfully put the poor sister in her place and impressed his investors with his intellect. I watched the satisfaction settle into the lines of his face. Then, I took a half step forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my drink. I simply straightened my spine, growing 2 inches taller in my presence, and looked him dead in the eye. The mask of the invisible sister dissolved, replaced by the face of the woman I actually was, the woman who had spent years in dusty archives, the woman who had buried herself in texts while they were busy buying yachts. "Monsieur Voss," I began, my voice projecting with the crisp, resonant clarity of a gavel strike. I switched to law French, but unlike his, mine was not the clumsy, practiced recitation of a man who had memorized a few phrases to sound smart. Mine was fluent. It had the rhythm and the cadence of a scholar. "Votre parole est bonne, mais votre grammaire est vile," I said, my tone bordering on bored. The laughter died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the corner of the room. The glass halfway to Monsieur Allery's mouth stopped in mid-air. I translated the shock on their faces into my next sentence, staying in the archaic dialect. "You called me a parasite, Gideon, but you used the masculine ending for a feminine subject, and regarding the term chosen action, I turned my gaze to the Europeans, addressing them directly. shifting seamlessly from the law French of the English courts to the high Latin of the lex mercatoria, the ancient merchant law that governed the seas these men profited from. Nemo dat quod non habet, I quoted softly, the Latin rolling off my tongue like velvet. No one gives what they do not have. I took a step closer to Gideon, whose face had gone the color of ash. I wasn't finished. I wanted to bury him. You cited the statute of uses regarding the wine and water, I continued, switching back to English now, so every single person in the vicinity, including my stunned mother and sister, could understand the dismantle. But you forgot that under the lex mercatoria, specifically the frantic laws of the Hanseatic League regarding port duties, which I believe you are currently negotiating, a man who cannot command his own syntax cannot command a fleet, I gestured to his tie, which was slightly crooked. You structured your insult in the passive voice. Gideon, it implies weakness. If you are going to insult me in a dead language to impress the directors of the Helvetia Maritime Trust, you should at least ensure you aren't accidentally voiding your own authority in the process. Silence. It was a heavy, thick silence that weighed 10,000 pounds. The jazz band seemed to have stopped, or perhaps my ears had just tuned everything else out. All 70 guests were staring. The smirk was gone from Gideon's face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. It wasn't just that I spoke the language. That would have been embarrassing enough. It was what I had said. I had casually dropped the name of the Helvetia Maritime Trust, the secret deal. The very reason these Europeans were here. The deal that was supposed to be confidential. The deal that Gideon had bet his entire reputation on closing tonight. I had just told the room that not only could I understand him, but I also understood his business better than he did. Gideon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the European men. They were not looking at him anymore. They were looking at me. And for the first time all night, they weren't looking at furniture. They were looking at a player. I held my empty water glass out to him. Now, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried like a scream. I believe you were the one who wanted water. Fetch it yourself. I did not wait for an answer. I turned on my heel, the mauve chiffon swirling around my ankles, and walked away from the stunned circle, leaving Gideon Voss standing in the wreckage of his own arrogance. I could feel his eyes boring into my back, not with contempt this time, but with fear. He had made a fatal error. He thought humiliation was a one-way street. He forgot that when you try to humiliate someone who has nothing to lose, you hand them the match to burn your house down, and as I walked toward the terrace doors for fresh air, I knew one thing for certain: the fire had just started. 7 hours before I destroyed the fragile ego of a billionaire in Rhode Island, I was sitting in my cramped apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, staring at a blinking cursor. The room smelled of instant coffee and the musty vanilla scent of decomposing paper. It was a smell that comforted me, the scent of history, of things that had already happened and could no longer hurt anyone. I was working. My job title, according to my tax return, was a freelance linguistic consultant. In reality, I was a glorified machine that turned complex technical jargon into readable English for people who did not care about the nuance of language. That afternoon, I was translating a 300-page operating manual for a centrifugal pump from German into American English. It paid 15 cents a word. I had calculated earlier that I needed to translate exactly 4,000 words to cover my rent for the month. I was currently at word number 3,212. My phone buzzed against the scratched laminate of my desk. The screen lit up with the name, Mother. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. It was a small rebellion, the only kind I could afford. "Hello, Mother," I said, keeping my eyes on the German compound noun describing a safety valve. "Kendall, tell me you are already on the road." Her voice came through, high and tight. It was the voice she used when she was managing appearances. "The traffic into Newport is going to be a nightmare, and if you are late, Gideon's mother will notice. Celine Voss notices everything. I am leaving in 20 minutes. I lied. I had not even showered yet. I just have to finish a contract." A contract, she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. To my mother, my work was not a career. It was a hobby that barely paid the bills, an embarrassing little secret that we did not discuss in polite society. Kendall, listen to me. Tonight is important. I need you to promise me something. I stopped typing. My fingers hovered over the keys. What? Tonight is about Delaney, she said. It is about her future. It is about this family finally getting some security. Do not make it about you. Do not do that thing you do. What thing? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. The smart thing, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Do not quote books nobody has read in 500 years. Do not correct anyone's grammar. Do not speak in those dead tongues you are so obsessed with. Just smile, drink the champagne, and blend in. Gideon's friends are powerful men. They do not want a history lecture from Delaney's sister. They want to see a happy, supportive family. I am always supportive, I said, my voice flat. You are intense, she corrected. You make people feel stupid, just for one night. Kendall, be normal, be invisible. Can you do that for your sister? I will be a ghost, I said. Good. Drive safe. Don't wear the glasses. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked around my apartment. It was a shrine to the life I was supposed to have. The walls were lined with bookshelves that I had built myself using cinder blocks and pine boards. They were groaning under the weight of my true inheritance. There were volumes of the Corpus Juris Civilis bound in cracking leather. There were commentaries on the Magna Carta written in the 16th century. There were glossaries of Anglo-Norman legal terms and dictionaries of maritime Latin that cost more than my car. I stood up and walked to the mirror hanging on the back of the bathroom door. The reflection that stared back was disappointing. It was not that I was ugly. I had the same bone structure as Delaney, the same dark hair, the same pale skin. But where Delaney was vibrant, I was washed out. I looked like a photocopy of my sister that had been left out in the sun too long. My eyes were tired. There were fine lines forming at the corners of my mouth, the kind that come from pursing your lips to keep quiet rather than from smiling. I was 31 years old, and I felt ancient. I reached out and touched the glass. You are not the main character, I whispered to the reflection. You are the background extra. You are the texture. You are the furniture. It was a mantra I had developed over the last 2 years. It was a survival mechanism. If you do not expect to be seen, it does not hurt when people look right through you. I walked back into the main room and picked up a framed photograph from the corner of my desk. It was the only photo on display. The rest were in a shoebox under the bed. The photo was taken 4 years ago. The background was the stone courtyard of a library in Bologna, Italy. The sunlight was hitting the ancient sandstone in a way that made the whole world look gold. And in the center of the frame was a girl who looked like me, but she was smiling with her whole face. She was holding an acceptance letter for a doctoral fellowship in medieval legal history. She looked like she was about to eat the world alive. That girl in the photo believed she was special. She believed that her mind was a weapon, that her ability to decode the cryptic languages of the past was a superpower. She thought she was going to be a professor, a historian, someone who mattered. I placed the photo face down on the desk. It hurt too much to look at her. I did not lose that future because I was not smart enough. I did not fail. I was recalled. It happened 2 years ago. I was in the middle of a translation project in Vienna when the call came. It was Delaney. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She told me Mother was sick. She told me the family business, a small boutique logistics firm my father had left us, was collapsing. She said they needed me. She said, "Come home, Kendall, please. We cannot do this without you." So I did what the good daughter does. I resigned from the fellowship. I broke my lease. I packed my books and my dreams into shipping crates and flew back to Ohio. When I arrived, I found out the truth. Mother was not dying. She had high blood pressure and a stress-induced ulcer. The business was not collapsing. It was just being mismanaged because Mother refused to downsize her lifestyle. But by then, it was too late. My spot in the program was gone. The funding was reallocated, the door to my future had slammed shut, and I was stuck on the wrong side of it. In Cleveland, helping my mother negotiate payment plans for her luxury SUV, they never apologized. They never even acknowledged what I had given up. To them, my academic career was just a phase, a selfish indulgence that I had finally abandoned to do my duty. I finished the translation of the pump manual 20 minutes later. I hit send, invoiced the client for $480, and closed the laptop. It was time to transform. I went to the closet and pulled out the dress. It was a dusty mauve chiffon, chosen by Mother, paid for by Mother, and mailed to me with a note that said, "Wear this. It covers your shoulders." I put it on. It fit loosely. It was the color of a bruise that was fading. I pinned my hair back in a severe bun, exactly the way I knew Gideon hated, because it was the one small act of defiance I could get away with. I applied minimal makeup. I left the glasses on the desk. I grabbed my clutch, checked to make sure I had my inhaler. Stress sometimes tightened my chest and my keys. I took one last look at the apartment. It felt like a cell. It felt like a waiting room where I was biding my time until I died. "Just survive," I said to the empty room. "Go, sit, smile, come back." I walked out the door and locked it. The drive to the airport was a blur of gray highway and gray sky. I parked in the long-term lot, the cheap one that required a shuttle bus to get to the terminal. I was flying a budget airline to Providence. Then taking a rental car to Newport, Delaney and Gideon had offered to fly me on the private jet with the rest of the wedding party, but I had declined. I could not stand being trapped in a metal tube with them for 2 hours. I preferred the anonymity of coach class. I was standing in the security line, taking off my shoes. When my phone vibrated again, I assumed it was Mother, checking to see if I was en route. I pulled the phone out of my purse, ready to type a quick, "on my way," but the number on the screen was not stored in my contacts. It was a local Rhode Island area code. I opened the message. There were 2 sentences. "Do not stand alone tonight. Gideon is looking for a sacrifice." I stared at the screen. The people around me were bustling, putting laptops in bins, complaining about the wait times, but I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my spine. Gideon is looking for a sacrifice. It was melodramatic. It sounded like a prank, but there was something about the specific phrasing that made my stomach turn over. A sacrifice. Not a target, not a victim, a sacrifice. That implied ritual. That implied that for Gideon to gain something, something else had to be destroyed. I knew Gideon Voss was not a good man. I knew he was arrogant, controlling, and dismissive. I had seen the way he looked at Delaney, like she was a prize poodle he had just purchased, but I had never thought of him as dangerous. I thought he was just a garden-variety narcissist with too much money. This text message suggested otherwise. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the delete button. The rational part of my brain, the part that translated technical manuals and organized legal footnotes, told me to ignore it. It was probably a wrong number. Or maybe it was a drunk ex-girlfriend of his trying to stir up trouble. But the other part of me, the historian who spent her life looking for patterns in the chaos of the past, felt a warning bell toll deep in my chest. I did not reply. I could not reply. Who would I ask? Who is this? What do you mean I deleted the message? I wanted to pretend I had never seen it. I wanted to believe that tonight was just going to be another boring, humiliating family obligation where I stood in the corner and drank warm water. I put the phone back in my bag and walked through the metal detector. The machine did not beep. I was clean. I was safe. But as I put my shoes back on, the cold feeling did not leave. It settled in the marrow of my bones. I had spent 2 years trying to be invisible, trying to be nothing, trying to make sure no one noticed me. But as I walked toward the gate that would take me to Newport, I had a sinking realization that my invisibility was about to run out. Someone was watching. Someone knew I was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I was terrified that I might actually be the main character in a story I did not want to be part of. I boarded the plane, took my window seat, and watched the gray pavement of Cleveland fall away beneath me, unaware that I was flying straight into an execution. The memory of how I lost my life does not start with a bang. It starts with the smell of dust and old leather in a small, climate-controlled room in Vienna. It was 2 years ago. I was 29. I was sitting at a long wooden table in the archives of the university, a stack of parchment facsimiles in front of me. I had just received the email I had been working toward for my entire adult life. It was an acceptance letter for a fully funded research position, a 3-year grant that would allow me to finally write the book on medieval maritime law that I had been outlining in my head since I was 22. It was not just a job, it was validation. It was proof that I was not just the quiet Graham sister, but a scholar with a voice that mattered. I remember staring at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was going to be free. I was going to be someone. Then my phone rang. It was 3 a.m. in Ohio, which meant nothing good ever came from a call at that hour. I answered it, expecting a wrong number, or perhaps a drunk dial from an old friend. Instead, I heard Delaney screaming. It was a raw, terrified sound that scraped against the inside of my ear. She was hyperventilating, her words coming in jagged, broken gasps. "Kendall, you have to come home," she sobbed. "It is Mom. She is collapsing. Everything is collapsing." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What happened?" "She fell," Delaney cried. "She just went down in the kitchen. There is so much blood. Kendall, I do not know what to do. The business accounts. There are letters from the bank. They are going to take the house. Mom is dying. Kendall, I know she is dying. You have to come back. I cannot do this alone." "I am coming," I said. It was a reflex. It was the programming my mother had installed in me since birth when the family breaks. Kendall fixes it. I did not think. I did not hesitate. I walked out of the archives, leaving the facsimiles on the table. I went straight to the airport. I bought a one-way ticket to Cleveland that cost me nearly $2,000, wiping out my savings. I emailed the program director from the departure lounge. I typed the words that still haunt me when I try to sleep. "Due to a catastrophic family emergency, I must decline the position effective immediately." I burned the bridge while I was standing on it. I thought I had no choice. I thought I was rushing to a deathbed. The flight took 9 hours. I spent every minute of it staring at the seatback in front of me, praying, bargaining with a God I was not sure I believed in. Let her live. Just let her live, and I will figure the rest out. When I landed in Cleveland, I did not wait for luggage. I ran to the taxi stand. I rushed to the hospital, my chest tight with panic. Prepared to say goodbye to the woman who gave birth to me, I burst into the room on the 4th floor. My mother was sitting up in bed. She was eating a cup of red Jell-O. The television was on, tuned to a daytime talk show. Delaney was sitting in the chair next to her, scrolling through her phone. There were no tubes. There was no life support machine. There was no priest administering last rites. "Oh, Kendall," my mother said, looking up with a vague, drugged smile. "You made good time." I stood in the doorway, my suitcase handle gripping into my palm so hard my fingers went white. "Delaney said you were dying." "I had a bleeding ulcer," my mother said, waving her spoon dismissively, "and my blood pressure spiked. The doctor said it was stress, high cortisol. I need rest. Kendall, absolute rest." "But the blood," I stammered. "Delaney said there was blood everywhere." "It was scary," Delaney said, not looking up from her phone. "She threw up blood. It was gross." I panicked. I looked at them. They were calm. They were safe. The crisis that had caused me to torch my career was, in reality, a treatable medical condition exacerbated by poor diet and financial stress. "I resigned," I whispered. The words felt like ash in my mouth. "What?" Mother asked, distracted by the TV. "I resigned from the program in Vienna," I said, my voice rising. "I gave up the grant. I told them I was not coming back because you were dying." My mother sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a martyr. "Kendall, do not be dramatic. You can just call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. Besides, family comes first. You know that. I need you here to handle the bank. They are threatening to foreclose on the warehouse. Delaney cannot handle that math. I walked out of the hospital room and went to the bathroom down the hall. I locked myself in a stall and vomited. I did try to call them back. I sent emails. I begged. But the academic world is competitive and ruthless. 2 days later, I received a polite, brief reply. The position had already been offered to the runner-up. The funding was allocated. The door was closed. I stayed in Ohio. I had nowhere else to go. I moved into the small apartment in Cleveland. I took over the bookkeeping for my father's failing logistics company. I negotiated with the bank. I set up payment plans. I saved the warehouse. I saved the house. I saved them. And in return, I became invisible. It was during those first 6 months of my exile that Gideon Voss appeared. At first, he was just a name Delaney mentioned. She had met him at a charity gala I had forced her to attend to network for the business. Then, he became a presence, a black sedan waiting in the driveway, a bouquet of flowers the size of a shrubbery arriving on a Tuesday. Delaney began to change. Before Gideon, Delaney was chaotic, a bit lazy, but she had a spark. She liked trashy reality TV and eating tacos in her pajamas. She had a loud, unself-conscious laugh. But as Gideon entered her orbit, the edges of my sister began to smooth out. She stopped wearing bright colors. She started wearing neutrals, creams, beiges, soft grays. She stopped eating tacos. She started talking about clean eating and presentation. I remember the first time I saw the change clearly. It was about 8 months after I came home. I was at my mother's house, going over the quarterly taxes. Delaney walked in. She was wearing a tennis bracelet that I knew cost more than my car. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "Gideon gave it to me," she said, touching the diamonds absently. "It was a Tuesday gift." "He is spending a lot of money on you," I said. "You have only been dating for 3 months." "He likes to take care of me," Delaney said. Her voice was different, too. It was softer, more modulated. It sounded practiced. "He says I deserve the best. He says he wants to elevate me." "Elevate you?" I asked. "You are a person, not a construction project. What does that mean?" Delaney's eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp, defensive anger. "You would not understand. Kendall, you are stuck in your books. You do not understand how the real world works. Gideon is powerful. He can make everything easy. He paid off Mom's credit cards last week. Did you know that he just wiped the debt clean?" I did not know that. I felt a sick lurch in my stomach. "Delaney, that is not a gift. That is leverage. You do not let a man buy your debt unless you are willing to let him own the asset. You are just jealous," she snapped. "You are jealous because you are alone and poor and I am going to be somebody." I stopped asking questions after that. I watched from the sidelines as my sister was systematically dismantled and reassembled into the perfect corporate wife. Gideon Voss did not want a partner. He wanted a reflection. He wanted a woman who looked good on his arm, who spoke when spoken to, and who signaled to the world that he possessed the finest things. I started to notice the smile. It happened gradually. The real smile, the one that scrunched up her nose and showed her gums, disappeared. It was replaced by the Gideon smile. It was a tight, controlled expression. It showed exactly the right amount of teeth. It was the smile of a flight attendant during turbulence. It was a smile that said, "I am terrified, but I am doing exactly what I'm told." I saw it when he corrected her pronunciation of a wine list at dinner. She smiled. I saw it when he told her to go change her dress, because the neckline was a bit desperate. She smiled. I saw it when he grabbed her arm a little too hard to steer her through a crowd. She smiled. I realized then that my sacrifice had been for nothing. I had given up my life, my passion, my future, to come home and save my family. I had thought I was saving them from financial ruin, but I had only saved them for a different kind of poverty. My mother was happy because her bills were paid. She looked at Gideon like he was the Messiah. She did not care that he treated her daughter like a show pony. She only cared that the checks cleared, and Delaney was drowning in luxury. She was suffocating under the weight of cashmere and platinum. Tonight, at this engagement party, I had watched that smile crack. I had seen the way Gideon looked at her when she laughed a little too loudly at a joke. His eyes went cold, and her laughter died in her throat instantly. She had looked at him, terrified, and then she had put the mask back on. I stood on the terrace of the Newport mansion, the cold ocean air biting at my bare arms. Inside, the music had started up again after my little performance. I could hear the murmur of voices. They were probably talking about me, the crazy sister, the rude sister, but I did not care about them. I cared about Delaney. She was walking into a trap. Gideon Voss was not just an arrogant rich boy, he was a collector, and he had just acquired the final piece of his collection. I thought about the text message I had received at the airport. Gideon is looking for a sacrifice. I had thought it was a warning for me, but as I looked through the glass doors, watching Gideon grip Delaney's waist with a hand that looked more like a claw than a caress, I realized I was wrong. I was not the sacrifice. I was already gone. I was the collateral damage from 2 years ago. The sacrifice was Delaney. She was the one being led to the altar. She was the one who was going to be consumed. My mother had sold her to clear the ledger, and Delaney, poor, sweet, stupid Delaney, had walked willingly onto the pyre because she thought the fire was gold. I leaned against the stone balustrade and gripped the cold railing. My knuckles turned white. "Not this time," I whispered to the dark Atlantic Ocean. I had let them take my future in Vienna. I had let them turn me into a ghost in my own life. I had let them silence me for 2 years, but I would not let them eat her. I turned back toward the glowing doors of the ballroom. I was not just the sister who knew dead languages anymore. I was the sister who knew where the bodies were buried. And if Gideon Voss thought he could buy this family without reading the fine print, he was about to learn a very painful lesson in contract law. I pushed off the railing and walked back toward the light. I was done being the invisible support beam. It was time to become the demolition crew. The black town car that picked me up from the rental lot at the airport was not a courtesy provided by the groom. It was an Uber Black I had paid for myself, costing me $140, a sum that meant I would be eating ramen for the next 3 weeks. But I could not arrive at the venue in a Toyota Corolla. In this world, the vehicle you stepped out of was not just transportation, it was your opening statement. The car wound its way through the narrow, gas-lit streets of Newport. We passed the tourist traps. The mansions turned into museums, and the harbor filled with yachts that cost more than the GDP of small island nations. Finally, the driver turned onto a private lane that did not appear on the GPS. There was no sign. There was no gate code. There was just a heavy iron gate that swung open slowly, as if it resented admitting us. The venue was not a hotel. It was a club. It was one of those places that did not need a name because the people who belonged there already knew where it was. It was a massive Georgian structure of red brick and white marble, sitting on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, like a fortress guarding against the poverty of the common world. There was no placard, no welcoming banner. There was only a small, tarnished bronze number 19 bolted to the front door. My driver stopped at the base of the stairs. I tipped him $5, which was all the cash I had, and stepped out into the salt air. The entrance was guarded by 2 men who looked less like doormen and more like private military contractors squeezed into tuxedos. They had earpieces coiling down their necks and eyes that scanned the street for threats, or in my case, for impurities. I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking loudly in the silence. The wind whipped at the hem of my mauve dress, trying to tangle it between my legs. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the cold metal of my inhaler through the fabric. One of the guards stepped in front of me. He did not smile. He did not say good evening. "Name," he said. It was not a question. It was a demand for credentials. "Kendall Graham," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am the sister of the bride." He did not step aside. Instead, he picked up a heavy clipboard, no iPads here. Technology was too plebeian for old money and ran a gloved finger down a list of names. He took his time. He let me stand there in the wind. letting the cold seep into my bones, letting me wonder if perhaps Gideon had left me off the list entirely as a final joke. The guard's eyes flicked up from the paper. He scanned me. He started at my shoes, which were sensible heels I had bought on sale at a department store 3 years ago. He moved up to the dress, noting the lack of designer stitching. He looked at my jewelry, simple gold studs, not diamonds. Finally, he looked at my face. His expression was not hostile. It was worse. It was bored. It was the look a quality control inspector gives a product that barely meets the minimum standards for shipping. "Graham," he muttered, checking a box. "You are late." "The flight was delayed," I said, though I owed him no explanation. "Bag check," he said. I opened my small clutch. He leaned in, his large frame blocking the light, and rooted through my personal effects. He touched the inhaler. He touched the lipstick. He touched the small notebook I always carried. It felt invasive, a physical violation disguised as security. He was not looking for weapons. He was looking for a reason to turn me away, finding nothing illegal. He stepped back and nodded to the heavy oak door. "Go on," he said. "Try to keep the line moving." I stepped through the threshold and into the lion's den. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a thick, cloying scent of white orchids, beeswax, and something metallic like old coins warmed in a sweaty palm. It was the smell of power. The foyer was cavernous. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung from a ceiling painted with cherubs and storm clouds. The walls were lined with oil portraits of dead men stern, white faces with mutton chops and cold eyes. The ancestors of the people inside. They looked down from their gilded frames with judgment. Just standing on the Persian rug made me feel like I had broken a rule I did not know existed. I checked my coat with a silent attendant and moved toward the sound of the party. As I passed a cluster of women near the entrance to the ballroom, women wearing silk that flowed like water and diamonds that caught the chandelier light, I heard it. "That is her," a voice whispered. It was low, cultured, and sharp as a razor. "Who?" another voice asked. "The sister," the first woman said. "The other one? The remaining one?" The words hit me in the chest. The remaining one? It was a brilliant insult. It implied that Delaney was the product, the chosen one, the successful export, and I was the inventory that no one wanted to buy. I was the leftover. I was the residue of the Graham family. I did not turn my head. I did not acknowledge them. I kept walking, staring straight ahead, pretending I was deaf, but my cheeks burned. I reached the entrance to the ballroom. It was a sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns. A jazz band was playing something soft and inoffensive in the corner. Waiters moved through the crowd like synchronized swimmers, balancing trays of champagne and oysters. I needed to find my place. I scanned the room for the seating chart. It was displayed on an easel near the bar, written in elegant calligraphy on thick cream cardstock. I found the head table immediately. Gideon, Delaney, Gideon's parents, Conrad and Celine, my mother, the governor of Rhode Island, a few other heavy hitters. I scanned the tables radiating out from the center. Table 1, Table 2. The VIPs, the business partners. I found my name at the very bottom of the list. Table 14. I looked around the room. Table 14 was not near the head table. It was not even near the middle. It was tucked into the far back corner, right next to the swinging double doors that led to the kitchen. It was the worst seat in the house. I walked toward it. Every time the kitchen door swung open, a blast of hot air and the clattering sound of dishes washed over the table. It was a drafty, noisy spot where the servers would constantly be bumping into my chair. It was the table for the people who had to be invited, but whom no one wanted to see. It was a table for poor relations, disgraced cousins, and the remaining sister. I sat down. The chair was cold. There was no one else at the table yet, just me and 10 empty settings. "Kendall," I jumped slightly. Delaney was standing there. She had materialized out of the crowd like a spirit. She was wearing white, not a wedding dress, but close enough. It was a sheath of silk that clung to her terrifyingly thin frame. Her hair was swept up in a complex chignon that must have taken hours. She looked breathtaking. She also looked like she was about to shatter. "Delaney," I said, standing up to hug her. She embraced me. But it was not a warm hug. It was a collision. She squeezed me so hard my ribs ached. Her fingers dug into the fabric of my dress, clawing at my back as if she were drowning and I was driftwood. "You are here," she whispered into my ear. Her breath smelled of mints and terror. "I am here," I said, pulling back to look at her. "You look beautiful." "Do I?" she asked. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning for someone. Gideon chose the dress. He said white signifies purity of intent. "It is lovely," I lied. It made her look like a ghost. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a frantic hiss. She leaned in close, pretending to fix the strap of my dress so no one would see she was panicking. "Tonight is volatile. Please, Kendall, I know you hate him. I know you think he is a monster. But please, for me, just be quiet. Don't do anything noticeable. Don't make a scene. If you love me, just sit here and eat the chicken and go home." "I am not going to make a scene," I said softly. "I promised Mother." "Good," she said. "Good." Suddenly, a voice boomed over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to our host, Gideon Voss." At the sound of his name, Delaney flinched. It was a small movement, a twitch of her shoulders, a sudden intake of breath. But I was holding her hands, and I felt it. A tremor ran through her fingers, a vibration of pure, instinctual fear. It was the reaction of a dog that expects to be kicked. I looked at her face. The smile was back plastered on, rigid, terrified, but her eyes were screaming. "Delaney," I started, my voice hardening. "Why are you shaking?" "I am not shaking," she said, pulling her hands away. "It is just adrenaline. I have to go. He wants me at the front." She turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd of admirers, leaving me standing alone next to the kitchen doors. I sat back down, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. That flinch, that was not wedding jitters. That was conditioning. I looked out at the room with new eyes. I stopped looking at the clothes and the jewelry. I started looking at the dynamics. I saw Gideon near the fireplace. He was holding court, surrounded by a group of men who stood differently from the rest of the Americans. They were older. They wore suits that were cut with European precision, narrower lapels, darker fabrics. They were not drinking. They were not laughing. They were observing. In the center of this group was an old man. He was short, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He was leaning on a cane, but he did not look frail. He looked like a king who was deciding whether or not to execute a prisoner. He was watching Gideon. He was watching the way Gideon moved, the way he spoke, the way he commanded the room, and then the old man's eyes shifted. He looked past Gideon. He looked past the beautiful guests. He looked all the way to the back of the room, to the drafty corner by the kitchen doors. He looked at me. His gaze was calm, analytical, and completely devoid of warmth. It was the look of a man reading a dossier. He held my eyes for 3 seconds an eternity in a room like this, and then gave a nearly imperceptible nod before turning back to Gideon. My stomach dropped. Margot Klein, the lawyer I had not met yet but would soon, had warned me in the text message that Gideon needed a sacrifice. But as I watched the dynamic between Gideon and the Europeans, the pieces clicked into place. The Americans were here for a party. The Europeans were here for an audit. Gideon was performing for them. Delaney was a prop in his performance, and I was the unknown variable they had just identified. This was not a celebration of love. This was a closing dinner for a merger. Gideon was selling something, his company, his future, perhaps even his soul to that old man. And for the deal to go through, everything had to be perfect. The image had to be flawless. I looked down at my empty plate. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not just the remaining sister, I was the loose end. I was the flaw in the fabric that Gideon was desperately trying to hide. That was why I was at table 14. He wanted to bury me in the corner so the Europeans would not see the one part of the Graham family he could not control. I picked up my water glass. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing. You should have checked the seating chart better. Gideon, I whispered to the empty chair next to me. He had made a tactical error. By putting me next to the kitchen, he had put me next to the service staff. He had put me in the shadows. And as any historian knows, the shadows are where you learn the secrets that bring empires down. The kitchen doors swung open, and a waiter rushed out with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He bumped the back of my chair, jarring me. "Watch it," he muttered, not even apologizing. "No," I said, staring at the back of Gideon's head across the room. "You watch it." The game had started before I even walked in the door. I just hadn't known the rules. But now I did. And if Gideon Voss thought he could sacrifice my sister to close a deal with that stone-faced old man, he was going to find out that the remaining sister was the one who remained standing when the smoke cleared. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted the moment Gideon Voss decided to make his presence felt. It was not a gradual change. It was sudden and absolute, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. The jazz band did not stop playing, but they seemed to play softer, receding into the background as if they understood that the real performance was about to begin. Gideon moved through the crowd with the easy, terrifying grace of a man who has never been told no in his entire life. He did not walk. He glided. The sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns parted for him, not out of respect, but out of a magnetic necessity. People turned their bodies toward him like sunflowers tracking the sun. He offered a handshake here, a clap on the shoulder there, a kiss on the cheek to the wife of a senator. It was a masterclass in social dominance. He was the gravity that held the room together, and he knew it. Trailing in his wake were his parents, Conrad and Celine Voss. If Gideon was the sun, they were two orbiting planets made of solid ice. Conrad Voss was a man who looked like he had been cured in a smokehouse. He was leathery, gray, and entirely devoid of warmth. He scanned the room not for friends, but for liabilities. His wife, Celine, was a vision in silver silk. She was beautiful in a way that was painful to look at too tight, too polished, too perfect. Her smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, but her eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a woman who had spent 40 years pretending that everything was fine while standing in a burning building. They drifted toward the back of the room, toward the service doors, toward table 14. I stiffened. I put my hands in my lap to hide the fact that I was gripping my napkin hard enough to tear the linen. Conrad reached the table first. He did not say hello. He did not introduce himself, though we had only met once before, briefly, at a funeral. He simply looked down at me. His gaze started at my hairline and ended at my shoes. It was an appraisal. He was checking to see if the extra granddaughter was going to be a problem. "You are sitting," Conrad said. It was not a question. It was an observation that sounded like an accusation. "Hello, Mr. Voss," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It is a lovely party." "It is crowded," he replied, turning his back on me immediately to survey the room. "Too many people from the wrong side of the registry." Celine Voss drifted up beside him. She looked at me, and for a second, her smile faltered. It was not because she disliked me, it was because she did not know what to do with me. I was not rich enough to be flattered, and I was not staff enough to be ordered around. I was a glitch in her matrix. "Kendall," she said, testing the name as if it were a foreign food she was unsure she would like. "Your dress is very practical. The color is sensible." "Thank you," I said. It was an insult. Of course, in their world, sensible was a synonym for poor. Before I could say anything else, the crowd shifted again. Gideon had arrived. He did not look at me. He looked over my head, scanning the service area behind me. He was close enough that I could smell him sandalwood. scotch, and ozone. He radiated heat. "Kendall," he said, still not making eye contact. He held out his empty crystal tumbler. He did not ask. He just extended his arm, expecting me to be there to receive it. I froze. "Kendall," he repeated, snapping his fingers once, a sharp, dry sound. "Take this. It is cluttering the table." I looked at the glass. Then I looked at my mother, Carol, who had scurried over from a nearby conversation the moment she saw the Voss family congregate. My mother's face was a mask of desperate pleading. Her eyes begged me, "Do it!" She was screaming silently. "Just take the glass. Do not embarrass us. We owe them everything." I felt a wave of nausea. This was the game. Gideon was testing the boundaries. He wanted to see how much humiliation I would swallow to keep the peace. He wanted to see if I was broken yet. I reached out and took the glass. "Thank you. Kendall," Gideon said, his voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension. He finally looked down at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "Since you are up, pull that chair out for Celine. The staff is too slow tonight." I stood there, holding his dirty glass. The request was absurd. There were waiters everywhere, but he was doing this for an audience. The group of European men, the ones I had noticed earlier, were watching from a distance. Gideon was showing them that he could command even his own family. My mother stepped forward before I could move. "Oh, Gideon, allow me," she chirped, her voice high and frantic. She reached for the heavy mahogany chair. "Kendall is a bit slow today. You know how she is." "No," Gideon said, raising a hand to stop her. "Carol, you are a guest. Kendall is family adjacent. She can handle a chair." He looked at me. "Well," I set the glass down on the table with a clink that was slightly too loud. I walked over to the chair. I pulled it out. Celine sat down without acknowledging me. She smoothed her skirt and turned to her husband. "The floral arrangements are adequate," she said. As if I had not just been turned into a servant in front of 50 people, Gideon leaned in close to me, his lips brushing my ear. "Good girl," he whispered. "See? It is not so hard to be useful." He turned and walked away, back toward the center of the room, back to the light. My mother followed him with her eyes, a look of adoration on her face. It was pathetic. It was terrifying. She looked like a cult member watching her leader ascend. "He is so commanding," my mother murmured to no one in particular. "He is going to take care of everything. We just have to make sure he is happy." "He is a bully, Mother," I said quietly. She whipped her head around, her eyes flashing with genuine anger. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop it right now. You are jealous. You have always been jealous that Delaney found someone who matters. Gideon paid off the warehouse note last week. $50,000. Kendall, he did that with a phone call. Do not you dare ruin this with your pride." She turned and bustled away to find a waiter, eager to fetch Gideon a fresh drink herself if she had to. I sat back down at table 14. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. It was a cold, hard rage that settled in my stomach like a stone. I needed a distraction. I turned my attention to the service doors behind me. They were swinging open and closed as the dinner service ramped up. The noise of the kitchen bled out the clanging of pots, the shouting of the chef. Because I was sitting in the punishment seat, I was invisible to the staff. 2 waiters paused right behind my chair, using the blind spot to take a breather. "Voss is on a tear tonight," one of them whispered. "Tell me about it," the other replied. "Did you hear he fired the interpreter an hour ago?" My ears pricked up. I did not turn around. I picked up my menu and pretended to study it. "Which one?" "The guy from the agency, the French specialist. Apparently, he tried to correct Voss on some pronunciation during the pre-dinner meeting with the Swiss group. Voss lost it, said he did not pay people to think. He paid them to echo. So who is translating for the Swiss guys now?" "Nobody. Voss thinks he can handle it. He says he took French in boarding school. He is winging it." The waiters laughed, a low, cynical sound, and headed back into the kitchen. I sat there, processing the information. Gideon had fired a professional interpreter because his ego could not handle a correction. He was conducting a multi-million-dollar negotiation in a language he probably had not studied since he was 18. "Arrogance," a voice said from the empty chair next to me. "It is the only thing he has in unlimited supply." I jumped. I had been so focused on the waiters that I had not seen the woman sit down. She was striking. She was not young, maybe 50, with hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that looked like it could cut glass. She was wearing a suit, not a gown. It was black, tailored, and very expensive. She did not look like a guest. She looked like an executioner who had stopped for a drink. She placed a martini glass on the table. It was full to the brim. "I am sorry," I said. "Gideon," she said, taking a sip of her drink. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, and they were fixed on the back of Gideon's head across the room. "He hates being outshined. It is a pathology. If the sun comes up too bright, he tries to sue it for breach of contract." She turned to look at me. Her gaze was intense, assessing. "You are the sister, the smart one, the one who disappeared." "I am Kendall," I said, "and I am just the sister." "I am Margot Klein," she said. She did not offer a hand. "I used to be general counsel for Voss Industries. I was the one who kept Gideon out of jail for tax evasion 3 times. I am currently, let us say, retired or liberated, depending on who you ask." "Why are you here?" I asked. "If you are liberated—" "Because I still own 3% of the stock," she said with a dry smile, "and because I like to watch car crashes. And tonight, my dear, is going to be a pileup on the interstate." She took another sip of her martini. "You saw him with the Europeans, the old man with the cane." "I saw him," I said. "He looks like he eats rocks for breakfast." "That is Lucien Mercier," Margot said, lowering her voice. "He runs the Helvetia Maritime Trust, based in Zurich, but their reach is global. They control the shipping lanes in the North Sea. Gideon is trying to acquire exclusive rights to their logistics chain. It is a deal worth $400 million. If he gets it, Voss Industries survives the debt crisis. If he blows it, the company is insolvent by Tuesday." I stared at her. "Insolvent, but he spends money like water." "It is all debt," Margot said. "It is a shell game. He is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and Peter is getting impatient. That is why he needs this deal, and that is why he is terrified." She leaned in closer. "Mercier is old school. He does not care about flash. He does not care about the venue or the lobster. He cares about the contract. Specifically, the language of the contract. The Helvetia Trust operates on a charter written in the 15th century. They take their terminology very seriously. They believe that the precision of the language reflects the integrity of the man." My heart skipped a beat. 15th century charter. Precision of language. "Gideon fired his translator," I whispered. Margot's eyes widened slightly. "Did he—" "I heard the staff talking. He fired him an hour ago for correcting him." Margot threw her head back and let out a short, barking laugh. "Of course he did. That fits. Gideon thinks he knows everything. He thinks because he memorized a few phrases of law French, he can charm Lucien Mercier." "Law French?" I asked. "It is Mercier's test," Margot explained. "He likes to conduct the final verbal agreement in the ancient legal dialect of the trust's founding. It is a power move. He wants to see if the partner respects the history of the trade. Gideon has been memorizing lines for weeks, but memorizing is not understanding." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You know what that is. Do not you law French?" "I have a master's degree in medieval legal linguistics," I said. "I spent 3 years translating Anglo-Norman court rolls." Margot froze. She looked at me with a new expression. It was not pity. It was calculation. "Well," she said softly, "that is interesting." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. She tore a page out and scribbled something on it. "Gideon is going to try to dazzle them," Margot said. "He is going to stand up there and try to speak their language. He is going to try to prove he is one of them, but he is a fraud, and Lucien Mercier smells frauds like a shark smells blood. She slid the piece of paper across the table to me. He is going to come for you. Kendall, Margot said. He has already started with the chair and the drink. He needs to assert dominance to calm his own nerves. When he realizes he is drowning with the Europeans, he's going to look for a kicking bag to make himself feel big again. That will be you. Why me? Because you are the only person in the room he thinks is beneath him, who also represents a threat. You are the intellectual. You are the one who actually knows the things he pretends to know. He hates you for it. He wants to break you in front of them to prove that his money is worth more than your mind. I looked at the paper. It was a phone number. If things go sideways, Margot said, if he tries to destroy you, remember that I have the files. I know where the bodies are buried, and I know about the pressure he's putting on your sister. He is hurting her, I said. He is erasing her, Margot corrected. But tonight, he might have made a mistake. He forgot that language is a weapon, and he just walked onto a battlefield without a sword. Margot finished her drink in one swallow and stood up. Watch him, Kendall. Watch his hands when he talks to Mercier. He is twitching. He is scared to death, and a scared man is dangerous. But he is also prone to error. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd like a dark omen. I sat alone at table 14. The noise of the party seemed to fade away. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I looked across the room at Gideon. He was laughing with the Swiss group, but Margot was right. His hands were clenched. His smile was too wide. He was sweating. He was walking a tightrope. He was trying to fake his way through a negotiation that relied on a language he did not understand, with men who valued precision above all else, and he had just fired his safety net. I touched the cold glass of water on the table. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not fear anymore. It was clarity. Gideon Voss had built a castle out of lies. He had bought my sister. He had humiliated my mother. He had tried to turn me into a servant, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. He was playing a game of words, and for the first time in my life. I was holding the rulebook. I took a sip of water. It was warm, but it tasted like victory. I settled into my chair, straightened my spine, and waited for him to make his move. I knew he would come back. He would need to humiliate me again to feed his ego before the final toast. But this time, I would be ready. The invisible sister was about to become the most important person in the room. From my vantage point at table 14, I had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the tragedy unfolding at the center of the room. It was a tragedy disguised as a celebration, a horror movie shot in soft focus with a champagne filter. I stopped looking at the guests. I stopped looking at the architecture. I focused entirely on the dynamic between my sister and her fiancé. To the untrained eye, they were the picture of a fairy tale romance. Gideon kept his arm wrapped around Delaney's waist, pulling her close as they moved from one cluster of investors to another. He would lean down and whisper in her ear, and she would throw her head back and laugh, the sound tinkling like crystal. But I was not an untrained eye. I was a historian. My entire professional life had been dedicated to reading between the lines of official narratives, finding the coercion hidden in the margins of treaties, seeing the bloodstains that had been scrubbed off the parchment. I watched Gideon's hand. It rested on the small of Delaney's back, right against the white silk of her dress. When they were standing still, his fingers were flat. But whenever Delaney began to speak for more than 5 seconds, I saw the change. Gideon's thumb would dig into her spine. It was a subtle movement, invisible to anyone standing in front of them. But from the side, I could see the fabric bunching under the pressure. It was a signal. Stop talking. And every single time he did it, Delaney stopped mid-sentence. She would not stutter or look confused. She would simply trail off, smile a dazzling, empty smile, and turn her face up to Gideon, effectively yielding the floor to him. It was a conditioned response. It was the reaction of a creature that had been trained with a shock collar. I watched them approach the mayor of Providence. Delaney started to tell a story. I recognized the setup. It was a funny anecdote about her high school graduation, but before she could reach the punchline, Gideon's hand slid up to her upper arm. He squeezed. It was not a caress. His fingertips turned white from the force of the grip. Delaney's smile froze. The light in her eyes went out, replaced by a dull, flat obedience. She stopped talking immediately. Gideon smoothly took over the conversation, turning the topic from her graduation to his company's recent philanthropic efforts in the inner city. She was not his partner. She was his ventriloquist dummy. He had hollowed her out and replaced her personality with his own script. "She looks happy," a voice rasped. I tore my eyes away from the gruesome spectacle to find Conrad Voss standing at my table again. He had not really left the vicinity. He had been circling the perimeter like a shark patrolling a reef, and now he had decided to bite. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. He did not ask for permission. He placed his heavy hands on the tablecloth, interlacing his fingers. He looked like a man who was used to buying companies, dismantling them, and selling the parts for scrap. "Mr. Voss?" I said, picking up my fork and pushing a cold potato around my plate. "I assume you did not come over here to discuss the catering." "I like to know the cost of things," Conrad said. His voice was like grinding gravel. "Everything has a cost. Every acquisition, every merger, every dinner party." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "So tell me, Miss Graham, what is the cost for you?" I put the fork down. "I do not understand the question." "Do not play coy," he snapped. "You are the smart one." "Right. That is what the dossier said. The academic, the one with the potential." He gestured vaguely toward the room. "You see all this money. You see your sister marrying into a dynasty. And you are sitting back here by the kitchen door in a dress that is 3 seasons old. It must burn you." "It does not burn me," I said. "Everyone has a price," Conrad continued, ignoring me. "Your mother's price was $50,000 and a lease on a Range Rover. Cheap. Your sister's price was the illusion of safety. Expensive, but manageable." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He laid it on the table. "I want to know your price," he said. "What will it take for you to disappear?" I looked at the checkbook. It was leather, embossed with the Voss Industries logo. "Disappear?" I asked. "After the wedding," Conrad said. "We do not need a hanger-on. We do not need a sullen sister lurking in the background, quoting books and making people uncomfortable. We are rebranding the family image. You do not fit the brand." He uncapped a fountain pen. "Give me a number, a fellowship in Europe, a condo in Chicago. Write the number down, and you get on a plane tomorrow morning. You miss the ceremony, you go back to your books, and you leave Delaney to us." I stared at him. He was trying to buy me off. He thought I was sitting here, seething with jealousy, waiting for a payout. He thought that because his soul was for sale, mine must be too. I felt a cold calm wash over me. "Mr. Voss," I said, leaning forward so my face was inches from his. "You have miscalculated the asset." "Excuse me. I am not here for your money," I said. "And I am not here for your brand. I am here because my sister is terrified. I am here because her hand shakes when she hears your son's name. I am here because you people treat human beings like livestock." Conrad's face hardened. The checkbook remained on the table, but he capped the pen. "I do not want your check," I said. "I want my sister to be safe. And if I have to stand in the corner of every room she is in for the next 50 years to make sure she is safe, then that is what I will do." Conrad stared at me. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. He was running a computation in his head, input money, output compliance, and getting an error message. He did not know how to handle someone who refused to be a transaction. "You are a fool," he said finally, standing up and sliding the checkbook back into his pocket. "You think you are noble, but you are just an obstacle, and in this family, obstacles get removed." He turned and walked away without another word. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. My hands were trembling slightly under the table. I needed air. I needed to get away from the smell of roasted lamb and expensive perfume before I screamed. I stood up and walked toward the side exit, a set of French doors that led to a corridor connecting the ballroom to the library and the restrooms. The corridor was quiet. The walls were lined with dark oak paneling, and the floor was covered in a thick, sound-dampening runner. It was cooler here, away from the body heat of 70 people. I walked toward the library, intending to hide in there for 10 minutes. But as I approached the heavy wooden door, I heard a voice. It was Gideon. He was not using his public voice, the smooth baritone instrument of charm he displayed in the ballroom. He was using his real voice. It was higher, strained, and edged with panic. I stopped. I knew I should keep walking. I knew that eavesdropping on a man like Gideon Voss was a dangerous game, but my feet refused to move. I pressed myself into the alcove of a statue, obscured by the shadow of a marble bust of some long-dead industrialist. "No, you listen to me," Gideon hissed. He was on the phone. "I do not care what the preliminary report said. Mercier is stalling. He is looking at the fine print." There was a pause. Gideon was pacing. I could hear the slap of his dress shoes on the hardwood floor. "If Helvetia does not sign tonight, we are dead," Gideon said. "Do you understand the bridge loan is contingent on the maritime contract? If I do not walk out of here with that signature, the bank calls the note on Monday morning. We lose the port route. We lose the terminal." My breath hitched in my throat. The port route. It was a generic term to most people, but to me, it was a trigger. "He is asking about the Hanseatic protocols," Gideon said into the phone, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "He keeps bringing up the Hamburg exclusions in Article 40. I do not know what the hell he's talking about. I fired the translator. Remember, I thought I could handle it." My mind began to race. The Hamburg exclusions, Article 40, I knew those terms. I had spent 6 months of my life researching the evolution of liability clauses in North Sea shipping contracts. The Hamburg exclusions referred to a specific set of archaic rules derived from the Hanseatic League in the 15th century. They were loopholes. They were clauses that allowed a shipping trust to void a contract if the local partner failed to guarantee the safety of the cargo against acts of God and men. Lucien Mercier, the old man from the Helvetia Trust, was not just buying a logistics route. He was testing Gideon's liability coverage. He was using ancient terminology to ask a very modern question if your ships sink. Do we get paid? Or do you... And Gideon, the arrogant fool, had no idea what he was being asked. He thought it was just legal jargon. He did not realize that by failing to answer correctly, he was telling Mercier that Voss Industries was a high-risk partner. "Just get me the file," Gideon snapped. "I need the translation of the liability shield. Now, text it to me." He hung up the phone with a violent curse. I pressed my hand over my mouth. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Gideon was broke. The entire Voss empire was balancing on the tip of a needle, and that needle was this contract. If he failed to close the deal tonight, the house of cards would fall. He was desperate, and a desperate man is capable of anything. I took a step back, intending to retreat to the ballroom before he saw me, but my heel caught on the edge of the rug. It was a tiny sound, a scuff of rubber against wood, but in the silence of the corridor, it sounded like a gunshot. Gideon spun around. He saw me instantly. He did not look surprised. He did not look embarrassed. His face settled into a mask of cold, predatory amusement. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked toward me. I stood my ground. I refused to cower. "Kendall," he said, stopping 3 feet away from me. "You have a talent for appearing in places where you do not belong." "I was looking for the restroom," I lied. "Were you—" He took a step closer. He was tall, looming over me. "Because the restrooms are in the other direction. This hallway leads to the private offices, to the places where the adults talk." "I got lost," I said. "It is a big house." Gideon smiled. It was the smile of a wolf that has cornered a rabbit. "You are not lost. Kendall, you are lurking. You are listening. You think that because you read books, you understand what is happening here. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. Let me give you a piece of advice. Do not try to be a hero. Heroes get hurt. Smart girls stay at their table, eat their dinner, and keep their mouths shut. Because if you mess this up for me, if you do anything to spook my investors, I will make sure you and your mother are living in a shelter by next week. Is that a threat? I asked. It is a forecast, he said. Go back to the party and smile. He straightened his jacket, turned, and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving me shaking in the hallway. I waited until he was gone before I let myself breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs. He was terrified. I had seen it in his eyes. Under the threats and the arrogance, he was a man standing on a trapdoor with a noose around his neck. He is unraveling, a voice whispered. I spun around. Margot Klein was standing at the other end of the corridor, near the French doors. I had not heard her approach. She moved like a ghost. She walked toward me, her heels making no sound on the runner. She did not look at me. She looked past me, toward the door where Gideon had exited. He knows he is in trouble, Margot said quietly. He promised Mercier a level of competence he does not possess. Now he is realizing that he cannot bluff his way through a maritime charter. She stopped next to me. She did not stop walking, but as she passed, she pressed something into my hand. It was a small, heavy square of cardstock. If things go wrong tonight, she murmured, barely moving her lips, do not call your mother. Do not call the police. Call the number on that card. Why? I asked, gripping the card. Margot stopped and finally looked at me. Her eyes were hard. Because when a man like Gideon Voss fails, he does not accept the blame. He looks for a scapegoat. He needs a reason why the deal fell through, a distraction, a saboteur. She glanced at the ballroom door. He is already setting the stage. Kendall, he has been telling the Europeans all night that you are unstable, that you are jealous, that you are difficult. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. That was why he had humiliated me with the law French. That was why he had made me move the chair. He was not just being a bully. He was building a narrative. If the deal collapsed, he was going to blame me. He was going to say that his crazy sister-in-law caused a scene, insulted the guests, and ruined the atmosphere. He was going to use me as the smoke bomb to cover his own incompetence. He is going to throw you to the wolves to save his own skin, Margot said. Be ready. She walked away, disappearing back into the party. I looked down at the card in my hand. It was black with silver lettering. No company name, just a name, Margot Klein, and a number. I slipped it into the bodice of my dress. Right next to my heart, I was not just a guest anymore. I was a target. Gideon was preparing to sacrifice me to the gods of finance. He was going to destroy my reputation to protect his own. But he had made one critical mistake. He assumed I was just a victim. He assumed I was just a thing in action, a passive object to be moved around the board. He did not know that I had the one thing he needed to survive. He did not know that I understood the language of the contract better than he did. I smoothed my dress. I checked my reflection in the dark glass of the French doors. I looked pale, but my eyes were burning. Okay, Gideon, I whispered. You want a scapegoat? You just found a wolf. I pushed open the doors and walked back into the ballroom. I waited exactly 30 seconds after Delaney left the ballroom before I stood up to follow her. She had moved with the frantic, clipped pace of someone trying to outrun a panic attack. Heading not toward the main exit, but toward the private family powder room down the east corridor, I slipped through the crowd. Ignoring the inquisitive glances from the guests at table 12, I walked past the library, past the security detail who looked bored, and pushed open the heavy door to the powder room. It was a sanctuary of marble and gold leaf, silent save for the hum of the ventilation. Delaney was standing at the sink. She was gripping the porcelain edge so hard her knuckles were white. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking in a rhythm that I recognized instantly. It was the silent, heaving sob of a woman who knows she cannot afford to ruin her mascara. I locked the door behind me. The click of the latch was loud in the tiled room. Delaney's head snapped up. She looked at me in the mirror. Her face, usually so composed, was a ruin of exhaustion. The happy bride mask had slipped, revealing eyes that were red-rimmed and terrified. She looked 5 years older than she had 10 minutes ago. "Get out," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need a minute." "You do not need a minute," I said, walking over to stand beside her. "You need an exit strategy." Delaney grabbed a paper towel and dabbed furiously at her eyes. "Stop it. Kendall, do not start with your lectures. Not tonight." "I am not lecturing you," I said, leaning against the vanity counter. "I am looking at the bruising on your wrist." Delaney froze. She instinctively pulled her left hand close to her body, covering the red marks with her other hand. "I bumped into a table," she lied. It was a reflex, instantaneous and pathetic. "He squeezed you," I said, my voice low and hard. "I watched him do it. Every time you tried to speak, every time you tried to have a personality, he clamped down on you like a vice. That is not love, Delaney. That is behavior modification." Delaney spun around to face me. The defensive anger in her eyes was hot and bright. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think just because you have a master's degree and read books that nobody cares about, you are the expert on human behavior." "I am the expert on patterns," I countered. "And this pattern ends with you being a prisoner in your own home. You are jealous." Delaney spat the words out. "You have always been jealous. You think you are better than us because you left. You think you are so superior because you chose art and history while we stayed here and dealt with reality. Well, reality costs money. Kendall, reality is expensive." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "A transaction. Because if you are selling yourself, you are selling too low." Delaney let out a bitter, jagged laugh. She leaned back against the sink, her energy suddenly draining away. She looked small in her expensive dress. "It is not a sale," she whispered. "It is a foreclosure." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "Gideon did not just pay off the warehouse note," Delaney said, looking at the floor. "He bought the mortgage on Mom's house. He bought the outstanding business loans. He bought the credit card debt. All of it." She looked up at me, and the despair in her eyes was bottomless. "He owns us. Kendall, the total was nearly $4 million. Mom was leveraged up to her eyeballs. If I walk away tonight, he calls the loans tomorrow. We lose the house. We lose the business. Mom goes bankrupt. She will have nothing. She will be on the street." The silence in the room was deafening. $4 million. My mother had not just mismanaged the business. She had hollowed it out. She had been living a lie for years, funding a lifestyle she could not afford by borrowing against assets she did not really own. And Gideon Voss had swooped in not as a savior, but as a predator acquiring a distressed asset. "So you are the payment," I said softly. "I am the collateral," Delaney corrected. "As long as I am Mrs. Gideon Voss, the debts stay dormant. If I leave, the family is destroyed." She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was cold. "Please, Kendall, I know you hate him, but I can handle him. I just have to learn the rules. I just have to be quiet. Just let me do this. Do not make a scene. If you fight him, you are not saving me. You are sinking us." I pulled my hand away gently. I felt sick. "Stay here," I said. "Fix your face." "Where are you going?" Delaney asked, panic rising in her voice. "I need to speak to Mother." I did not wait for an answer. I unlocked the door and walked out. The rage in my chest was a cold, expanding star. I found my mother, Carol, standing near the entrance to the ballroom. She was holding a glass of champagne, smiling at a woman I recognized as the wife of a local judge. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had successfully offloaded a heavy burden. I walked up to her. I did not care about social niceties. I did not care about the judge's wife. "Mother," I said. Carol turned, her smile faltering when she saw the look on my face. Kendall, is everything all right? Where is Delaney? Excuse us, I said to the judge's wife. I grabbed my mother's elbow gentler than Gideon, but firm enough to show I was not asking, and steered her toward a quiet alcove near the coat check. Kendall, you are hurting me, Carol hissed, pulling her arm away once we were out of earshot. What is wrong with you? People are watching. Let them watch, I said. Delaney just told me about the $4 million. Carol's face went pale. The radiant mother of the bride vanished, replaced by a frightened woman caught in a lie. She looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. She should not have told you that, Carol whispered. It is family business. I am family, I snapped. Or am I just the staff you sold her? Mother, you traded your daughter to a sociopath because you could not stop buying lease cars and renovating a kitchen you do not cook in. I did it for us. Carol's voice rose, trembling with self-righteous tears. You do not know what it was like after your father died. The bills kept coming. I just wanted you girls to have a good life. Gideon is a good match. He can provide. He is buying a pet, I said. And you let him? Then, a thought struck me. A terrible, sickening thought that connected the past to the present. 2 years ago, I said slowly, when you called me in Vienna, when Delaney called me screaming that you were dying, Carol looked away. She could not meet my eyes. You were not dying, I said, the realization landing like a physical blow. You were not even sick. Were you? You were broke. Carol sniffed, dabbing at her nose with a cocktail napkin. The bank was threatening to take the house that week. I did not know what else to do. I needed someone here to talk to the accountants. Delaney was too young. I needed you. So you lied, I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I gave up my fellowship. I gave up my career. I gave up the one thing that was mine. I came home to save your life. And you just wanted a free bookkeeper. You are the oldest, Carol cried, her voice low and desperate. It is your duty. Look at you. Kendall, what were you going to do with that degree anyway? Read old papers? It was a hobby. I needed help in the real world. I looked at the woman standing in front of me. For years, I had thought I was the disappointment. I thought I was the selfish one for wanting a life outside of this town. But I realize now that I was never a person to her. I was a resource. I was an insurance policy she cashed in when she got scared. And now that she had used me up, she was cashing in Delaney. You did not bring me home to save the family, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. You brought me home so you would not have to face the consequences of your own greed. And now you have fed Delaney to the wolf, so you can keep your country club membership. It is done, Kendall, Carol said, straightening her spine and trying to regain her composure. The papers are signed. The debts are consolidated under Voss Industries. If you ruin this tonight, you are not just hurting Gideon. You are destroying your mother. Can you live with that? She looked at me with a challenge in her eyes. She was weaponizing her own incompetence. She was betting that I was too good, too dutiful, to let her fail. Go back to the party, Mother, I said coldly. Drink your champagne, enjoy your safety, but do not think for 1 second that this is over. I turned my back on her. I could not look at her for another second without screaming. I walked back into the ballroom, the noise, the music, the laughter. It all felt distorted. Like a nightmare carnival, I felt unmoored. Everything I had believed about my duty, my family, my sacrifice, it was all a lie. I made my way back to table 14. It was my exile, but it was also the only place where I could think. I sat down. My hands were gripping the edge of the table. I was breathing hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction. You look like someone who has just seen the machinery behind the curtain. The voice was calm, accented, and very close. I looked up. Standing on the other side of my table was the old man, Lucien Mercier. He was smaller up close than he appeared from a distance, but his presence was immense. He leaned heavily on an ebony cane with a silver handle. His tuxedo was cut in a style that was 20 years out of date but immaculate. His eyes were gray, sharp, and they were studying me with an intensity that made me feel like a manuscript under a magnifying glass. "Monsieur Mercier," I said. I was surprised my voice worked. "Miss Graham," he replied. He did not ask if he could sit. He remained standing, respectful but distant. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I have a policy of knowing who is in the room with me. I am nobody," I said bitterly. "Just the sister." "On the contrary," Lucian said. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so the nearby tables could not hear. "I know exactly who you are. I read your paper on the linguistic evolution of liability clauses in the North Sea trade routes, published in the Journal of Legal History 3 years ago. It was rigorous." I stared at him. "You read my paper. I make it my business to read everything." Lucian said, "Especially when I am about to enter into a contract that relies on those very clauses. Most people find the distinction between force majeure and absolute liability to be boring. You, I suspect, find it fascinating." He looked toward the front of the room, where Gideon was currently laughing loudly with a group of Swiss bankers. Gideon looked confident, but I could see the sweat on his brow. "Your future brother-in-law," Lucian said softly, "believes that language is a decoration. He believes that if he uses the right words, he can hide the truth. He thinks law French is a party trick." He turned his gray eyes back to me. "He does not understand that in my line of work, a comma can cost $1 billion. He does not understand that words have weight." I looked at Lucian. He was not a savior. He was not a kind old grandfather. He was a businessman who was about to be scammed, and he knew it, but he was also giving me something. He was acknowledging me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I saw what happened earlier." Lucian said, "I saw him try to shame you, and I saw you answer him. You have a sharp mind, Miss Graham. It is a waste to see it sitting in the shadows." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the noise of the jazz band. "Tonight is going to be difficult," he said. "Mr. Voss is desperate. I can smell the desperation on him. He needs my signature to survive. He will do anything to get it. He will lie. He will threaten." Lucian paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "He thinks he holds all the cards because he holds the money. But you hold something else." "What?" I asked. "The truth," Lucian said, "and the ability to articulate it." He tapped the silver handle of his cane against the floor. "Language is a knife, Miss Graham. Most people use it to butter their bread. Gideon uses it to cut people down." He straightened up, preparing to return to his table. "But a knife can also cut ropes. If you find yourself tied up tonight, remember that you are holding the blade." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod and walked away. I sat there, stunned. A knife can also cut ropes. I looked at my hands. I thought about the $4 million. I thought about my mother's lies. I thought about Delaney's bruised wrist. I thought about the text from Margot Klein and the phone number hidden in my dress. Gideon had built a prison for my family. He had used money as the bars and fear as the lock. He thought he was untouchable because he owned the debt. But Lucian was right. The contract was not signed yet. The deal was not done. Gideon was still vulnerable, and his vulnerability lay in the very thing he had mocked me for. He needed the language to be perfect. And I was the only one in the room who could spot the flaw. I felt the fear recede, replaced by a cold, sharp determination. I was done being the victim. I was done being the sacrifice. I watched Gideon raise a glass of champagne at the head table, smiling that shark-like smile. "Enjoy it while you can." "Gideon," I whispered. I reached for my water glass, not to drink, but to clear my throat. The time for silence was over. The time for the knife had come. The sound of a silver spoon striking a crystal champagne flute is supposed to be a joyous noise. It is the sound of celebration, of announcements, of new beginnings. But as Gideon Voss tapped his glass at the head table, the sound rang out like a gavel striking a judge's bench. It was sharp, imperative. and it demanded total submission. The murmur of conversation in the ballroom died instantly. 70 faces turned toward the front of the room. The jazz band cut their instruments, leaving a sudden, ringing silence that felt heavy with expectation. Gideon stood up. He adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo jacket. A movement that was both casual and practiced. He looked every inch the master of the universe. The lighting in the room seemed to bend around him, catching the gold of his watch and the terrifyingly perfect white of his smile beside him. Delaney sat frozen. She was staring at the tablecloth. Her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her fingers looked like wax. "Thank you all for coming," Gideon began. His voice was amplified by a microphone, booming through the speakers with a rich, resonant authority. "Tonight is a special night, not just for me, but for the legacy of two families." He placed a hand on Delaney's shoulder. She flinched, a microscopic movement that only I noticed from my exile at table 14. "I want to propose a toast," Gideon said, raising his glass. "To my beautiful fiancé, Delaney." A polite ripple of "hear, hear" went through the room. "When I was looking for a wife," Gideon continued, his tone conversational, almost joking, "I had a very specific list of requirements. In my world, a partner is not just a companion. She is a reflection of the firm. She is the face we present to our investors." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He was not talking about a woman. He was talking about a hood ornament. "Delaney is perfect," Gideon said, looking down at the top of her head. "She is beautiful, of course, that goes without saying. But more importantly, she is poised. She is graceful. She understands that in a life as complex as mine, there is no room for unnecessary drama. She is the calm water in the storm. She never raises her voice. She never demands the spotlight. She is simply there, supportive, silent, perfect." He paused to let the words sink in. The room cooed softly. The guests, drunk on expensive wine and the proximity to power, heard a compliment. I heard a description of a lobotomy. He had not mentioned her humor. He had not mentioned her kindness. He had not mentioned that she painted watercolors or that she could run 3 miles in 20 minutes. He praised her silence. He praised her lack of existence. Delaney managed a weak smile, lifting her head just enough to look like she was participating. She looked like a hostage reading a proof-of-life script. Then, Gideon's eyes shifted. He looked out over the crowd, scanning the room until his gaze landed on the back corner, on the shadows, on me. "Of course," Gideon said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming confidential. "We cannot all be so practical. Every family has its eccentricities." The guests turned in their chairs. They followed his line of sight. 70 pairs of eyes swiveled toward table 14. I felt the heat of their attention like a physical burn. "We are delighted to have Delaney's sister, Kendall, with us tonight," Gideon said. The smile on his face was tight, cruel. "Kendall is the scholar of the family. She has spent the last few years in Europe, burying herself in libraries." He chuckled, a sound that invited the room to join him in his amusement. "She studies dead languages, ancient laws, things that have been dust for 500 years. It is a charming hobby, really, while the rest of us are out here building the future, driving the economy, dealing with the harsh realities of the market. Kendall is reading fairy tales in Latin." Laughter rippled through the room. It was not genuine laughter. It was the nervous, sycophantic laughter of people who knew who signed their paychecks. They were laughing because Gideon was inviting them to mock the outsider. "But we love her for it," Gideon added, the sarcasm dripping from every syllable. "It must be nice to live in a world where nothing has consequences, where you can hide in a book and pretend the real world, the world of bills and debts and responsibilities, does not exist. A passion that creates absolutely no value is a luxury. Isn't it?" Celine Voss, sitting at the head table, leaned into the microphone. Her silver dress shimmered. "Well," she said, her voice dry and cutting, Let us hope this marriage teaches everyone a little bit about reality. It is high time for some people to grow up. The room laughed harder this time. My mother, Carol, was laughing too. I could see her near the front, her head thrown back, laughing at her own daughter to please the man who owned her mortgage. I did not move. I sat perfectly still at table 14. I did not look down at my plate. I did not blush. I did not pick up my glass to hide my face. I stared straight at Gideon. My expression was blank, neutral, unyielding. I was a historian. I knew that the purpose of a public shaming is to provoke a reaction. The tyrant needs the victim to cry, or to scream, or to run away. That reaction validates his power. It proves that his words have weight. By doing nothing, I was denying him that validation. I saw the flicker of annoyance in Gideon's eyes. He waited for me to look away. I did not. The silence stretched out, becoming awkward. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused tension. The guests started to shift in their seats. They sensed that the script was not being followed. I was supposed to be the embarrassed poor relation. Instead, I was looking at him with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. Gideon lowered his glass. The smile stayed fixed on his face, but it became rigid. He could not let it go. He could not let me win the staring contest. "You know," Gideon said, stepping away from the head table. He took the wireless microphone with him. Speaking of the real world, he began to walk through the tables. He was coming toward me. The crowd parted again. The air in the room grew electric. This was unscripted. This was dangerous. Gideon walked with a slow, predatory gait. He stopped right in front of table 14. He towered over me, blocking out the light from the chandelier. He smelled of aggression. "Kendall," he said, his voice booming through the speakers so that even the kitchen staff could hear. "Since you are such an expert on history, maybe you can help us with something relevant. We have some distinguished guests from Zurich here tonight." He gestured vaguely toward the table where Lucien Mercier and his associates were sitting. The Europeans were not laughing. They were watching with stone-faced intensity. "We were discussing the trade logistics for the North Sea route," Gideon said. "Specifically, the tariff implications for non-EU cargo moving through the Rotterdam exchange. Since you spent so much time in Europe on your little vacation, surely you picked up something useful. Or were you too busy reading poetry?" It was a trap, a blatant, clumsy trap. He was asking a specific, technical question about modern logistics, banking on the fact that an academic historian would know nothing about current tariffs. He wanted me to stutter. He wanted me to say I don't know. He wanted to prove to Lucien Mercier that I was an idiot, and by extension, that my knowledge of the contract language was irrelevant. I looked at him. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. "The Rotterdam Exchange does not handle the tariff classifications for the Helvetia Trust's specific cargo class," I said. My voice was not amplified, but in the silence of the room, it carried clearly, because the trust operates under a grandfathered clause from the Treaty of Berne. Their cargo is processed as transit goods rather than import goods. The tariff is zero. The only cost is the dredging fee for the deep water berths. I paused, looking up at him. "But you know that, of course, since you are the one negotiating the contract." Silence. Absolute. Crushing silence. Gideon's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed in his temple. I had not just answered the question. I had corrected the premise. I had shown that I knew the details of the deal better than he did, and I had done it without sounding arrogant. I had sounded bored. I glanced over at Lucien Mercier. The old man did not smile, but he raised one eyebrow, a microscopic gesture of approval. Gideon saw it too. He saw the shift in the room. He saw that his attempt to paint me as an incompetent dreamer had backfired. He was losing control of the narrative. The humiliation was rebounding onto him. He needed to pivot. He needed to change the game immediately. He laughed. It was a loud, forced sound that echoed unpleasantly off the marble walls. "Very good," Gideon exclaimed, clapping his hands once. She reads the newspapers. Give her a round of applause. Everyone?" A few people clapped uncertainly. "But that is boring," Gideon said, his eyes narrowing. He leaned in closer to me, the microphone hovering dangerously near my face. "Tariffs are boring. Business is boring. That is why we hire people to handle the paperwork. Right?" He turned to the crowd, grinning like a ringmaster at a circus. "Kendall here is a performer at heart. She loves the theater of the old world. You know, earlier this evening, she tried to impress my friends with some very dramatic recitations." He looked back at me. The malice in his eyes was naked now. He was not trying to be witty. He was trying to destroy me. "Why don't we have a little fun?" Gideon said. "Since you are so fluent in these dead languages, since you think they are so important," he gestured to the room. "Why don't you entertain us? Say something in, what was it? Law French, give us a speech. Recite a poem. Show everyone what 4 years of expensive education and 0 job prospects looks like." He held the microphone out to me. "Go on," he goaded. "Sing for your supper. Kendall, make yourself useful." The room was dead quiet. This was not a toast. This was not a joke. This was a public execution. Gideon was stripping away the pretense of civilization. He was treating me like a court jester. He was telling the room and Lucien Mercier specifically that my knowledge was nothing more than a party trick. He wanted to reduce me to a spectacle. If I refused, I looked like a coward. If I agreed, I looked like his puppet. He thought he had checkmated me. I looked at the microphone. Then I looked at Delaney. She had covered her face with her hands. She could not watch. Then I looked at Lucien Mercier. The old man was leaning forward on his cane. He was waiting. "Language is a knife," he had said. Gideon wanted a performance. He wanted me to speak in the old tongue to amuse his guests. He thought I would recite a poem about flowers or a prayer for mercy. He had forgotten what I actually studied. I did not study poetry. I studied law. I studied the brutal, binding contracts of the merchant marines. I studied the words that men use to condemn each other to debt and servitude. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I smoothed the front of my mauve dress. I did not take the microphone from Gideon's hand. I did not need it. My voice had been trained in lecture halls with bad acoustics. I knew how to project. "You want a demonstration," I said. It was not a question. "We are all waiting," Gideon smirked, thinking he had won. I looked him dead in the eye. I let the anger that had been simmering for 2 years rise up in my throat. I let the memory of my mother's betrayal, of Delaney's terror, of the checkbook on the table, fuel the fire. "Very well," I said. "I will give you a recitation." I turned to face the European table directly. I ignored the Americans. I ignored the socialites. I spoke to the judges, and I opened my mouth to deliver a verdict. Gideon stood before me, the microphone held loosely in his hand like a weapon he had forgotten he was carrying. He was drunk on his own power, buoyed by the nervous laughter of 70 people who were terrified of offending him. He thought he had cornered me. He thought that by dragging me into his arena, the arena of public spectacle, he had stripped me of my defenses. He did not realize that he had just handed me a loaded gun. "Well?" Gideon prompted, his voice booming through the speakers. "We are waiting. Kendall, give us a sample. Show us why your mother wasted so much tuition money." He took a step closer, invading my personal space, and switched languages. He dropped the English vernacular and slipped back into that bastardized, clumsy law French he had been practicing for weeks. Oyez, he began, mocking the traditional opening of a court session. He looked at the European table, seeking their approval, then looked back at me with a sneer. "Qu'est-ce que vient? Non. Qu'est-ce que use le pain de son maître doit chercher l'eau." The Americans in the room chuckled. To them, it sounded sophisticated. They heard the cadence of history and assumed it was a toast, or perhaps a poetic request. They did not understand that he had just called me a tenant who eats her master's bread, and ordered me to fetch water like a scullery maid. But the laughter did not extend to the table on the left. I saw Lucien Mercier stiffen. I saw the two Swiss bankers exchange a look of genuine distaste. They understood. They knew that law French was a language of precision, of contracts, of rights. To use it for a petty domestic insult was not just rude, it was a desecration of the code they lived by. Gideon, blind to their reaction, pushed further. He was enjoying himself too much to stop. Tu es un. He paused, searching for the word, his eyes glittering with malice. Tu es un tenant par souffrance, un parasite sans terre, he said it loudly. Tenant at sufferance, a parasite without land. He beamed at the crowd, expecting applause for his wit. He believed, with the absolute arrogance of a man who has never been corrected, that I would not understand the specific legal weight of the term. He thought I would hear the tone but miss the definition. He thought I was just a girl who liked old books, not a scholar who understood the brutal hierarchy of feudal property law. The room fell silent, waiting for my humiliation. They expected me to cry. They expected me to run out of the room, leaving Delaney to apologize for my frailty. I did not run. I stayed seated for exactly 3 beats. 1, 2, 3. I let the insult hang in the air until it began to smell like rot. Then, I stood up. I did not need a microphone. I pitched my voice low and resonant, projecting from the diaphragm, a trick I had learned defending my thesis in a drafty lecture hall in Vienna. Monsieur Voss, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I switched to law French, but unlike his, mine was not a performance. Mine was a native tongue. Votre grammaire est fausse, et votre âme est petite, I said. Your grammar is false, and your soul is small. Gideon's smile faltered. The microphone dipped slightly in his hand. I took a step toward him. You called me a tenant at sufferance, I continued, keeping the archaic dialect flowing smooth and fast. But you used the accusative case for a nominative subject, in the eyes of the court. You did not insult me. You merely proved that you do not know how to identify the subject of your own sentence. I saw the shock register on his face. It was a physical thing, a slackening of the jaw. He had expected silence. He had expected a stutter. He had not expected a lecture. The Americans looked confused. They looked back and forth between us, sensing the shift in power but not understanding the words. The Europeans, however, were leaning forward. Lucien Mercier was watching me with eyes that burned like cold stars. I was not finished. I was just getting started. I turned my gaze from Gideon to the guests, then specifically to the table where the investors sat. I switched languages again. I left the clumsy law French behind and ascended to the high, brutal Latin of the lex mercatoria, the ancient merchant law that governed the seas. Pacta sunt servanda, I quoted, my voice ringing out. Agreements must be kept. Gideon took a step back. He looked like he had been slapped. But, I continued, switching to English so there would be no ambiguity, there is a clause for bad faith, isn't there? Gideon? I walked toward him. He retreated, bumping into a chair. You are negotiating the North Sea route, I said, my voice steady and merciless. You are trying to secure the logistics rights for the Helvetia Trust, and you are relying on the Hamburg exclusions to protect you from liability. Gideon's face went the color of ash. Shut up, he hissed, away from the microphone. Kendall, shut up. I ignored him. I looked directly at Lucien Mercier. Caveat emptor, I said to the old man. Let the buyer beware. Specifically, regarding Article 40 of the Hanseatic Protocols, I turned back to Gideon. You told them you secured the deep water permits, didn't you? You told them the liability shield was absolute. I switched back to Latin, quoting the specific text of the treaty he was trying to sign. Nemo dat quod non habet. No one gives what they do not have. I pointed a finger at him, an accusatory gesture that felt like driving a nail into a coffin. You cannot sell the liability shield, Gideon, because you do not own the underlying asset. The Port Authority denied your permit 3 days ago. I saw the rejection letter in the public filing. You are trying to sign a contract for a route you do not legally possess. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that has detonated, but the sound wave has not yet hit. Gideon Voss was not just embarrassed, he was exposed. I had not just corrected his grammar, I had gutted his deal, I had revealed, in front of the very men he was trying to defraud, that his entire negotiation was based on a lie. Lucien Mercier slowly placed his glass on the table. He did not look angry, he looked vindicated. He looked at Gideon with the cold detachment of a judge sentencing a petty thief. Gideon looked at the Europeans. He saw the deal disintegrating in real time. He saw the $400 million evaporating. He saw his debts coming due. He saw the ruin of his name. Panic, raw and ugly, seized him. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone flinch. "She is lying!" Gideon screamed. His voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is lying. She is crazy. You cannot listen to her." He looked around the room, his eyes wild. "She is a spy. That is what she is. She is a corporate spy." He lunged toward me, grabbing my arm. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into my flesh. "Who sent you? Who are you working for? You have been sneaking around the hallways all night. I saw you. She was listening at the doors. She is trying to sabotage the merger." "Let go of me," I said, my voice cold. "Security!" Gideon shouted, spitting the words. "Get her out of here. She is trespassing. She is stealing proprietary information. Arrest her." The crowd gasped. The social veneer had completely shattered. This was no longer a party. It was a brawl. Two large men in black suits, the same ones who had checked my bag at the door, started moving through the crowd. They were pushing guests aside. Heading straight for me, my mother, Carol, jumped up from her seat. But she did not run to defend me. She ran to Gideon. "She is unwell," my mother cried, grabbing Gideon's other arm, trying to soothe him. "Gideon, please, she is off her medication. She does not know what she is saying. She is just jealous of Delaney." "She is a criminal," Gideon roared, shaking my mother off. "Conrad, call the police. I want her charged with industrial espionage." Conrad Voss stood up. He looked at me with pure hatred. He saw his family fortune slipping away, and he decided instantly that I was the expendable variable. "Get her out," Conrad barked at the security guards. "Take her to the back office. Hold her for the police." The guards were 10 feet away, 8 feet. I stood my ground. I did not struggle against Gideon's grip, though it was bruising me. I looked at Delaney. My sister was standing by the head table. She was trembling so violently she looked like she was having a seizure. Her eyes were locked on mine. She was seeing the violence, the lies, the reality of the man she was about to marry. "Delaney," I said softly, "look at him." "Grab her," Gideon shouted to the guards. One of the guards reached out. His hand, heavy and callous, closed around my upper arm, wrenching me away from Gideon. "Miss Graham, you need to come with us," the guard growled. "Get your hands off her." The voice was not loud. It was not a shout. It was a command spoken with the weight of mountains. Lucien Mercier had stood up. He did not look frail anymore. He stood with his cane planted firmly on the floor, his back straight, his chin lifted. He looked like the old world personified. The security guard hesitated. He looked at Gideon, then at the old man. "I said," Lucien repeated, his voice dropping to a glacial temperature, "release her." "Stay out of this." "Lucien," Gideon panted, his chest heaving. "This is a family matter. She is a spy. She is trying to ruin the deal." "There is no deal," Lucien said. The words hung in the air. "What?" Gideon whispered. "There is no deal," Lucien said, stepping away from his table. He walked toward us, the crowd parting for him with genuine fear. "If you touch that woman again, Gideon, not only will Helvetia withdraw from the negotiation, but I will personally ensure that every financial institution in Zurich, London, and Frankfurt marks Voss Industries as toxic." Gideon released me as if I were burning hot. He stumbled back. You cannot do that." We have a preliminary agreement. We had an agreement based on trust, Lucian said, and based on the competence of the language. He stopped in front of me. He looked at the security guard until the man released my arm and stepped back. Mumbling an apology, Lucian turned to Gideon. You accused this woman of being a spy. You accused her of stealing proprietary information. You mocked her education. You called her a parasite. Lucian shook his head slowly. You are a fool, Gideon. You are a child playing with fire. He gestured to me with his cane. Do you know why I recognized her? Lucian asked the room. Do you know why I read her thesis? Gideon stared, his mouth opening and closing. She is a translator. She is nobody. She is Kendall Graham, Lucian said. And 3 years ago, while working at the Institute for Legal History in Vienna, she was one of the primary contributors to the standardized lexicon for maritime contracts. The room gasped. I felt a shock run through me. I knew I had worked on the project, it was part of my fellowship work, but I had no idea it had become the standard. The very document you are trying to use, Lucian continued, his voice dripping with disdain. The very clauses you are trying to manipulate. She helped write them. She defined the terms. She built the framework that you are too incompetent to understand. Lucian looked at me, and for the first time, his face softened into a smile of genuine respect. She is not a spy, Gideon, Lucian said. She is the author, and you just tried to arrest the only person in this room who understands the rules of the game you are trying to play. Gideon looked at me. His face was a mask of horror. He looked at the woman he had called a parasite, the woman he had tried to erase, the woman he had treated like furniture, and he realized, with a dawning, sickly terror, that I was not the furniture. I was the architect. I rubbed my bruised arm. I looked at Gideon, who was shrinking before my eyes, diminishing from a titan of industry into a scared little boy in a tuxedo. You should have checked the citations. Gideon, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. I am in the footnotes. I turned to Delaney. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. She looked from me to Gideon, and I saw the realization hit her. The fear was breaking. The programming was cracking. Gideon was not a god. He was a fraud, and his power over her was based on a lie that I had just dismantled. It is over, I said to Gideon, but Gideon was not done. The desperation in his eyes shifted. It turned from panic to something darker, something feral. He looked at the ruins of his deal. Then he looked at Delaney. He realized he had lost the money. He had lost the prestige, but he still had one hostage. He lunged not for me, but for my sister. We are leaving, Gideon snarled, grabbing Delaney's wrist with a violence that made the guests scream. Now, but before he could drag her a single step, I moved. I was no longer the historian. I was the sister, and I was done watching. The silence that followed Gideon's attempt to drag my sister away was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. He stood there, his hand clamped around Delaney's wrist, his chest heaving with the exertion of his own collapsing ego. He looked at Lucien Mercier, then at me, and finally at the room full of people who were slowly realizing they were witnessing a crime. Not a wedding toast. Gideon released Delaney. He did not let her go gently. He shoved her away from him, a petty, violent gesture that made her stumble into the edge of the head table. Fine, Gideon spat. Straightening his jacket, the charm was gone. The sophisticated billionaire mask had dissolved, leaving behind the snarling face of a cornered animal. You want to play hardball? Let us play. He turned on his heel and pointed a shaking finger at my mother. You think this is over, he screamed, his voice cracking. You think you can just walk out of here? I own you. Carol, I own the mortgage on your house. I own the lease on your car. I own the debt on that pathetic little logistics company your husband left you. I bought it all. My mother shrank back, her hands flying to her mouth. I am calling the loans, Gideon announced, looking around the room as if challenging anyone to stop him. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I am calling every single cent due immediately. If you cannot pay, and I know you cannot, I will seize everything. You will be on the street by Tuesday. You will be homeless." He turned his venom toward me. "And you," he sneered, stepping closer until I could smell the sour taint of fear on his breath. "The scholar, the genius. I will make sure you never work again. I have friends on every board of trustees in this country. I will paint you as a corporate spy. I will sue you for defamation until you are buried so deep in legal fees, you will have to sell your organs to pay the interest. You want to correct my grammar, I will rewrite your entire life until you are nothing." It was a terrifying display. It was the roar of a man who knew he had lost the moral high ground and was now trying to burn the earth so no one else could stand on it. I did not flinch. I felt a cold, crystalline calm settle over me. He was threatening me with poverty. He did not understand that I had been poor for 2 years. I knew how to survive on ramen and silence. He was the one who did not know how to live without the cushion of his money. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "I am just getting started," Gideon yelled. Actually, a cool, dry voice cut through the shouting. "I believe you are quite finished. Gideon." Margot Klein stepped out from the shadows near the service entrance. She walked into the center of the room with the casual confidence of an executioner arriving for work. She held her phone in her hand, the screen glowing bright in the dim light. "Who invited her?" Celine Voss hissed, standing up. "Security, get this woman out." "Sit down." "Celine," Margot said. She did not raise her voice, but the command was absolute. "Unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in the blackmail charges I'm currently drafting." Celine sat down. Margot stopped in front of Gideon. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You really should have treated your legal counsel better," Margot said. "We tend to keep the receipts." She tapped the screen of her phone. Suddenly, Gideon's voice, recorded, clear, and unmistakable, blared through the room. It was not amplified by the speakers, but in the dead silence, it was loud enough. "The sister is a problem. She is smart. I hate smart women. They are exhausting. But do not worry. Once the merger is signed, I will crush her. I will humiliate her tonight in front of the Europeans. I will use the old laws to make her look like an idiot. And if she fights back, I will dangle her mother's debt over her head. They are desperate. Desperate people are easy to break." The recording stopped. Gideon went pale. He recognized the conversation. It was from a private meeting he had held with his advisors 2 days ago. That is edited," Gideon stammered. "That is out of context." "Is this out of context too?" Margot asked. She tapped the screen again. This time, it was a video. She turned the phone around so the room could see. It was footage from the security camera in the hallway. Taken earlier that evening, it showed Gideon and Delaney. It showed Gideon grabbing her wrist. It showed him backing her into a wall. It showed the terror on her face as he leaned in, his body language screaming aggression. There were no children involved, just a grown man using his physical strength to intimidate a woman he claimed to love. The gasps from the guests were audible. The image was grainy, but the violence was undeniable. "Assault," Margot said calmly, "extortion, and now, thanks to your little speech about the debts, we can add predatory lending with malicious intent to the list." She looked at Gideon. "I have sent copies of these files to 3 different cloud servers. If anything happens to me, or to the Graham family, they go to the press, and to the district attorney." Gideon looked around the room. The support was evaporating. The guests, his friends, his investors, the people he had spent years trying to impress were recoiling. They were not looking at a billionaire anymore. They were looking at a liability. Lucien Mercier stepped forward again. He looked at the phone in Margot's hand, then at Gideon. "The Helvetia Trust has 0 tolerance for unethical conduct," Lucien announced. His voice was the final nail in the coffin. "We are formally withdrawing our offer. There will be no merger. There will be no acquisition." He paused, letting the weight of the sentence crush the air out of the room. Furthermore, Lucian continued, I have a fiduciary duty to the market. Tomorrow morning, I will be filing a formal report with the International Chamber of Commerce regarding your attempt to misrepresent the liability clauses of the contract. You tried to sell us a route you did not own. Mr. Voss, that is fraud. The word hung in the air. Fraud. It was the one word that could kill a career faster than any scandal. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor began. It started at the back tables, the people who had the least to lose, and spread quickly to the front. The guests were leaving. They were grabbing their coats, their purses, their dignity, and fleeing. No one wanted to be in the background of the inevitable news photos. No one wanted to be a witness when the police arrived. Gideon watched them go. He watched his power walk out the door. He looked at his parents. Conrad Voss was staring at the table, refusing to meet his son's eyes. Celine was weeping silently, not for her son, but for her social standing. Gideon was alone. He turned slowly to Delaney. She was still standing near the head table, rubbing her bruised wrist. He looked at her with a desperate, pleading expression. He needed her. He needed a prop. He needed someone to stand by him so he could salvage the narrative of the grieving. Misunderstood lover. Delaney, he said, his voice trembling. Baby, please, tell them I love you. Tell them we are going to fix this. He reached out a hand. Come here. We can still get married. We can go away. Just you and me. Delaney looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. For the first time all night, for the first time in 2 years, I saw the fog clear from my sister's eyes. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The programming had been broken. She reached down to her left hand. She gripped the massive diamond ring that Gideon had placed there 6 months ago. The ring that had cost more than our house. The ring that was a shackle made of carbon. She slid it off. It hit the table with a heavy, metallic thud. It spun for a second, catching the light, before coming to rest next to an empty champagne glass. No, Delaney said. Her voice was not loud, but it was steady. It was her own voice, not the whisper Gideon had trained her to use. You can buy the house, Delaney said, looking him straight in the eye. You can buy the car. You can buy the silence of half the people in this city, but you cannot buy ownership of me. She stepped back. I am not an asset, Gideon, and I am not a sacrifice. Delaney, my mother cried out. Carol ran forward, grabbing Delaney's arm. What are you doing? Think about what you are saying. He calls the loans tomorrow. We will lose everything. Please, just apologize to him. We can fix this. I stepped between them. I gently but firmly removed my mother's hand from Delaney's arm. No, Mother, I said. We are not fixing this. You are destroying this family, Carol sobbed, her face blotchy with tears. You are selfish, both of you. Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? We will figure it out, I said. We will work. We will rent a small apartment. We will drive a used car. But we will not sell Delaney to pay for your mistakes. You do not understand, Carol wailed. It is a contract we owe him. A family is not a contract, I shouted, my voice finally breaking through her hysteria. A family is not a ledger where you balance the books by trading a child. You do not get to sell her future to pay for your past. I turned to Margot. The debt. Margot nodded. She walked over to where Gideon was standing, looking like a man who had just watched his house burn down. Here is the offer, Margot said to Gideon, and I suggest you take it, because it is the only lifeline you are going to get. She held up the phone with the recordings. Option A, she said. I release everything, the audio, the video, and a detailed affidavit from Kendall regarding the fraudulent contract terms. You go to jail for fraud and assault. Your company is liquidated. Your name becomes a cautionary tale. Gideon flinched. Option B, Margot continued. You sign a settlement agreement right now. You restructure the Graham family debt. You forgive 50% immediately as damages for emotional distress and assault. The remaining 50% is refinanced at zero interest over 30 years. And you sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that the engagement ended amicably due to irreconcilable differences. She pulled a folded document from her blazer pocket. She had prepared it. She had known. Sign it, Margot said. And you get to keep your freedom. You lose the girl. You lose the deal. But you stay out of prison. Gideon looked at the paper. He looked at the door where the last of his guests were disappearing. He looked at Lucien Mercier, who was watching him with unforgiving eyes. He had no choice. He was checkmated, with a shaking hand. Gideon took the pen Margot offered. He bent over the table where he had planned to toast his victory, and signed the surrender. He threw the pen down. He did not look at us. He turned his back and stared into the empty fireplace. "Get out," he whispered. "We are going," I said. I put my arm around Delaney. She was crying now, but they were tears of relief, the kind that wash away grime. As we turned to leave, Lucien Mercier tapped his cane on the floor. "Miss Graham," he called out. I stopped and turned back. Lucien reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. "I meant what I said," Lucien told me. "A mind like yours is wasted in the shadows. I am on the board of the Northgate Lexicon Institute in New York. We are currently compiling a comprehensive history of maritime law. We need someone who understands the language." He handed me the card. "The position comes with a stipend," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "And full tuition support to complete your doctorate. I believe you have a thesis to finish." I took the card. My fingers brushed against the embossed lettering. It felt like a key to a door I thought had been locked forever. "Thank you," I whispered. "Do not thank me," Lucien said. "You earned it. You brought the knife." I walked out of the ballroom. I walked down the grand staircase, past the portraits of dead men who judged no one anymore. I walked out the heavy front door into the cold, biting wind of the Rhode Island night. My mother was waiting by the curb, shivering, looking small and defeated. Delaney was standing next to her, looking up at the stars. "Where do we go?" Delaney asked. I looked at the rental car. I looked at the business card in my hand. I looked at my sister, who was free. "We go home," I said. "We pack, and then we start over." I took a deep breath of the salt air. It tasted clean. It tasted like zero balance. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not need to. I had walked into that house as a ghost, as a piece of furniture, as a footnote. I was leaving as the author of my own life. I opened the car door. "Get in," I said. "I am driving." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Kendall and her fight for justice. Please comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear from you and see how far this story has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Emma Revenge Stories. Like this video and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next one.